and thank you for joining me today. My name is Pam LaFountain, and I am an art educator at the Newport Library Art Center. Today we are going to be learning the basic cross stitch for counted cross stitch. This is part 2 of the series. If you have not watched part 1, selecting the materials to do counted cross stitch, please do so first as I explain the materials and where to find them. For this video, you will need the following materials. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is take our large piece of paper. Doesn't have to be very large, just a regular piece of paper. I want to remind you that counted cross stitch works on special material. So if you look at this material, it's all done in squares. And the squares, around the squares are little holes. And those holes are most important in making your cross stitch. So I want to do kind of a direction sheet so you can refer back to it if you need to. So what I'm going to do is put 4 dots on the paper, and that will refer to the 4 holes around each one of the squares. So those would be the holes. So you'd start down here with the first hole. And this hole is the one that you would bring your needle up from the bottom and come up through your material. So this one we're just going to call needle goes up, all right? Then you're going to bring your thread diagonally over here to the top right, and that's where you're going to have your needle go down into the fabric. And then you're going to bring it across. Now you're not going to see this on the front because this will be under your material. And you bring your needle up here at needle 3. And that's when you'll bring your needle back up and you'll take the thread over to the top left. And eventually you're going to be putting your needle back down through that material. Now that's just the simple basics stitch. You can just keep repeating that. The only thing you want to think of is that this number 3 over here for the next stitch will become your number 1, right? So let's kind of practice and get started. So you're going to need, for this next section, you're going to need a piece of thread or floss, a needle, some material, and a hoop if you have one, but you don't necessarily have to have one. Now, the floss that you're going to be using has 6 little strands of thread. Okay, and you can see those 6 strands. I have a very big squares on this material, so I'm going to use all 6. It will be easier for you to see. But for the material that I've suggested you use for this video, you really only need 2 or 3 of these little strands. So you want to cut a length, about the length from your arm to your shoulder, a little bit shorter. You don't want to get it too long, right? And you want to pull out 2 of those threads, and then thread your needle and have your hoop ready. So if you want to pause the video and come back when you're all set. Okay, so here we are. And I'm just going to pick one of these squares. So let's see, how about this one right here? And I'm going to bring my needle up through the bottom left of the thread, of the material. I'm going to pull it up. Now I'm going to watch on the back. This is the back. And I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to just lay it across like that and hold it. All right. And turn it back around. And I'm going to go down through hole 2. Like that. Okay. Now, this is kind of important. So when you turn this over, I'm going to take my needle and go down through this hole So if I turn it like that, I'm going to go through what looks like a hole up above it. And I'm going to try to keep my tail, my little thread here, right in between the two. And I'll show you why. If I bring it down like that, and if I turn it around, you'll see that it's actually coming up hole 3. And I'm going to push down like that. And what it actually does is it catches your thread. So we'll try that again. I'm going to go up through hole 1, down through 2, we'll turn it over. Just make sure. I'm going to go up through 3 and down through 4. Now, an important thing about this is you want to make sure that you always do your diagonals in the same order. So for example, I always do mine from the bottom left to the top right. And then the top one is from the bottom right to the top left. And I always do them this same way. So this diagonal going this way is always on the top. So I'm going to that. And I'm always going to have this second diagonal on the top, like that. Okay? Now, the other thing is that this tail, and I call this the tail, that part of your thread that goes through the needle. So here's the needle, and then this is like the tail. So 2 problems you might run into. If your tail is too short, you might lose your thread right through your needle. And then you'll have to rethread your needle, and it could be kind of a pain. If it's too long, if your tail is too long and it's really close to your material, you might actually sew it right up with your other thread, and then you're actually using twice the thickness. So your cross stitch will be twice as thick. So you really don't want to do either of those. So I try to think of keeping it halfway between my needle, which is right here, and my thread. So my tail is going to be somewhere kind of in the middle there, just so I don't lose it, but I also don't sew it up. Great. Okay, so I'll just do one more stitch, keeping those things in mind. Now, as you know, just cross stitchers never used a knot to get started. They also don't use a knot to end. So once you've done a few stitches like this, and let's say you're not using any more black, or let's say you've run out of thread at the very end, and you don't want to do another. You don't have enough thread to do another stitch. So if you turn it over, and you're simply going to go back through your stitches, and then you're going to pull that. And now it's kind of caught there. So you can take your scissors and you can cut that piece off like that. And at the same time, if you want to, you can cut your little tail off too, like that. Cut your material, but you can cut your tail off like that. So it's a pretty clean piece there. So here's the front. Like that. All right, so maybe you think you're probably ready to start practicing. If not, you can rewind the video and watch that again. So in order to practice, my suggestion is to get some graph paper like this. Okay, and you can come up with your own design. So I have some graph paper and I designed this apple, and the apple's pretty easy. And then I cut out a piece of material. This one's a little smaller, but my suggestion is if you cut out a piece of material about 4 inches by 4 inches, okay, 4 inches by 4 inches, and you use graph paper, it doesn't matter what size the squares are, you can use about 30 squares by 30 squares. So you want to keep your pattern within 30 squares and 30 squares. That way you won't run out of cloth. it will stay within your material. So I will show you how to kind of set all that up. But if you just want to practice, like I said, 4x4 inch square with a 30x30 squares on your design should be fine. So then you're ready to do some cross stitching. Our next video is going to show you how to do back stitching and also how to do some writing. So I hope you can join us. Get outside. Cross stitching is great to do outside in the bright sunlight because you can really see the squares really well. So I hope to see you back for part 3. Thank you.